Welcome to Velocity Philosophy. In this episode, we're joined by Ted Rath, Director of Sports Performance at the Philadelphia Eagles. Ted has a wealth of experience, and in this short episode, we cover a lot of ground that just shows how extensive his knowledge is, not just in velocity-based training, but across the S&C spectrum. Ted, this is his first year with the Eagles, which would have been an interesting and challenging start with the COVID situation. But he spent the previous 3 seasons with the Los Angeles Rams. This is his 12th season at the professional level. He's been recognised as S&C Coach of the Year, and of course he made it to the Super Bowl with the Rams in 2018. This is a really interesting and quick talk. It's well worth listening to. It's only 20 minutes long, but the amount of ground we cover is just astounding. So Jay, what do you think people should be watching out for in this episode?
Yeah, like you're saying, man, he's a seriously knowledgeable guy, not only just in VBT, but across the board.
Yeah.
So I think some of the main things, obviously, he talks about auto-regulation and how he uses that, how he motivates athletes. Talks about some load velocity profile stuff, so definitely listen out to that. And then, yeah, basically just his VBT experiences, which are really interesting. And how he integrates it with other monitoring systems. And then he sort of collects this database of knowledge that he can draw upon at any time and sort of make informed training decisions based upon. So definitely worth the watch. Yeah, let's get into it. What do you reckon?
Yep, let's go.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining us, Ted. We always thank our guests for coming and sharing their knowledge in the aim of helping spread awareness, particularly for us, about velocity-based training and educating people. Just using practical stories and anecdotes from coaches at the top of their game. Something we've been starting with our other guests, which really interests me, is it's kind of a 2-part question. Where did velocity-based training enter your awareness and your education from a professional development standpoint? But 2, how did you and when did you get to the point that it was part of your coaching repertoire? Like, when did it become part of your toolbox that you were using with players?
Great question. I believe the year, and don't quote me if I'm wrong, but it was around 2013. I was still with the Detroit Lions at that time. That would have been like my 4th or 5th year in the NFL. I'd been familiar with it, but actually being hands-on with it was around that time. And it started with a mobile device, and we started utilizing velocity for twofold. Number one, to track and more accurately assign weights just around certain ranges where we wanted guys from certain strength curves, or if we wanted an absolute strength protocol, or if we wanted to hit them closer to a 90% rep max number, then we knew that we were going to be able to isolate those numbers a little bit more accurately. So we started playing around with it. And then from that, as the sports science, quote unquote, world blew up on the American side of football, we started figuring out, hey, wow, we can utilize this for a lot more than just this. There's flags and there's triggers and there's neuromuscular fatigue markers that we can start to derive from this. If you don't have access to a force plate, or if you're mobile and we're training for a game in London and we're international, there are things that we can utilize from this technology that can also cross over and correlate to certain things where we're tracking fatigue. And then we're using those markers to make applicable changes to practice volumes and loads and intensities. So as we started to dive into it, obviously, just like anything, the further you go into it, you start to go down all these rabbit holes. So as we found that we could program better towards weight specifically within loads and ranges in the weight room, we also started to find, okay, wow, we can actually start to track power differences. We can look at training adaptations, but now we can also look at where the athlete is within maybe their micro or the weekly load cycle. So we anticipate that you're recovered, but your data is showing something else. Now we can make the appropriate decision to alter training going forward and practice for that matter.
Yeah, good. Yeah, okay.
Really across the whole VBT thing, basically. One question that I had was in terms of the technology itself. We know that you're obviously a GymAware man, but have you had any other experiences with some of the other technologies out there?
Yeah, yep, great question. We've used almost everything. I've used Tendo units to an extent, not as in depth. We've used push strength, which is a great theory to where you're establishing a mobile device, and it's something that can be utilized in maybe other environments where you do travel or you have athletes, especially right now where they're mobile. And then elite form, a couple other ones. So we've utilized a wide array of them. I firmly believe I like GymAware. I think GymAware from a usability standpoint is really, really usable. I also like the platform, the dashboard that you guys have built, because it becomes another tool in the toolbox. We can go in there and we can create quick reports for an athlete's graphically to latch onto, or if I'm sending a report to a coach, that's an easy way where I can pull off information from the dashboard and immediately export it and send it. So now we have things at our hands that are otherwise really, really difficult to gather. Then it takes man hours, then it takes time. So it's cutting down the step-by-step basis. So I do like the dashboards are really big key to what we utilize just for quick hit reports and maybe just one-offs. If a player's sitting in your office and he's like, well, what does this mean? Well, here, look at the screen, and I can pull things up and actually show him there in live time. And that helps to create that buy-in and understand what the athlete should know and what we're trying to achieve through our training with that athlete.
Yeah, that leads nicely into the next question we had, which is, again, it's a little bit of a two-part question. What are your favourite or most impactful features of GymAware, maybe from a coach's perspective, but then is there another set of features or another feature that's impactful for the players?
Yeah, for me personally, honestly, I do utilize it as a neuromuscular fatigue marker. So one of the things I'm getting from it, obviously, is just making sure that we're isolating certain training speeds, but also when we do select certain exercises, if it's a Monday in season, I know we're going to have certain groups jumping on the force plate, but I still want to get as many data points as I can. So I know for certain athletes in certain positions, we're going to isolate a clean pull metric, and we're going to utilize a standardized weight. And then we're going to compare that to their week-to-week drops, and then we're going to overlay it with the force plate. We're going to overlay it with their on-field metrics. We're going to overlay it with all this information because, once again, one data source is great, but then when I have 3 or 4 data sources that are all telling me the same thing, then I feel really confident in what I'm going to take to the coach or to the player to make an actionable decision. If I'm telling a coach we need to alter practice significantly, I want to feel confident that I've used the right information to give him that feedback loop. So now as we go through it, that's one of the biggest things for me, is just the consistent data from speed and from output. So I'll look at total power output. I'll look at whether it's an Olympic-based lift or whether it's a strength-based lift, gains, training adaptations, but also fall off and drop to make as a neuromuscular fatigue marker in measurement if it's in season specifically. And then as the athlete gets it, I think number one, there's 2 really big benefits. The one is the immediate impact of an auditory cue or visual cue when the athlete's competing and actually going through a lift. So as they go through that exercise, there's an auditory cue. You hit the speed, you hit the velocity that we're asking you to from this training adaptation or from this training protocol. Bam, okay, yes or no. You get that feedback. It's an instantaneous feedback loop, which I think is critical. And then the other side of that is we can make it competitive, not just from the athlete to themselves, because it's always great to self-compete, but now athlete A is competing with the next athlete at their position. So as they're getting into their training velocities and their training zones, we can say, hey, even though you might not be quote unquote as strong as the next athlete that's about to go, we can still improve you. You just increased 2% because you just PR'd, and that was your best speed with that load. So bam, great job. You actually won that set, even though the most weight lifted was with this athlete. For you, that's a way to quantify. And then for us, we can quantify to the athletes, you're getting better. Keep following the process. Keep trusting the process. So I think that instantaneous feedback loop is really, really cool. And that's something important in today's world. We all live with a cell phone. So that instantaneous gratification of, did I do a good job? Do I need to check Twitter? No, we're in the weight room. So listen, you have an auditory cue and we're going to lead you down the way. So I think the technology helps today's athlete.
Some coaches are quite selective with their use of GymAware, and it's more of a testing protocol, maybe start of a session or every few weeks they pull it out. But just the way you describe it, you're much more extensive with your application of the GymAware tool. I was just wondering if you could maybe outline that a little bit further. So maybe describing some of the other key exercises you use it on, or phases of training that you're pulling GymAware out with.
Yeah, and we do utilize it in that way too. We'll utilize it with our opening power block. So if it's a power exercise, we're going to strap a GymAware on. And then for me, I love to track any main exercise. So for me, if it's a core, quote unquote, core exercise, for me, that's a squat, that's a power clean, that's anything Olympic and ballistic based, and that's anything off the rack. So if it's a power movement with a barbell, if it's a bench press, incline press, we'll still track to get long-term data, and then also squat variations. So we'll load up a trap bar if it's a trap bar jump. I think for me, if I'm looking at programming, I'm typically going to program within a power block first when the athlete's ENS is completely fresh and we've primed them and we're ready to roll. And then when we get into our strength block where we're doing the meat of our training of our exercises, we're still going to track those exercises because I want to make sure, number one, from a training adaptation standpoint, we're assigning the right weights to elicit the right gains or the right loads that we want. And then as time goes, we can continue to respond and go back to the data and say, are we doing a good job of loading this exercise and loading this athlete? Is there that progressive improvement? If not, where do we have to make a modification? So within that, we're going to utilize it as often as we can because, once again, I'm never going to regret having data. Yeah. The worst case scenario would be where we went back and said, man, I wish we would have tracked that. That's the one thing I don't want to do. I would rather have the data that we can always go back to and revisit.
I think that's just a really good point. This isn't a question. It's just we often hear the opposite. People are like, well, we only use it like a measurement device, in this case, GymAware, really selectively, but there's not really a downside to pulling it out more often and just having that information. One day you might use it. If you don't measure it, you can't use that data later. It's just not there.
No question.
Yeah.
Yep. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So, Ted, I've obviously I was fortunate enough to come in and observe one of your training sessions. But for those people at home that might not have been so lucky, can you just sort of describe like what the average training session looks like? Like how many racks do you have set up? Are the guys all coming in at the same time, or is it set times? And so how does that sort of play out? Like, do you have GymAware on most of the racks, or who sets it up?
Yeah, it's one thing. I'm blessed to have a really good staff, and right now I'm transitioning to a new team with Philadelphia, so it's a really unique environment to where we have a little bit better facility. You saw us in LA to where we were limited in space, and it was a temporary facility, so we made the best usage of our space. And with that, we had a GymAware unit on every rack, and here I plan to do the same. And we'll have basically 14 total workstations here, so we'll have them on each one. Within that, I do love lifting in groups. So I like the aspect of football. Football is a team sport. It's one of the ultimate team sports. You have 22 members on the field, 11 on each side of the ball, playing at the same time. And it's such a cohesive, teamwork-based aspect to the sport that I love getting them in there because of the cultural benefit. So if we can have guys training together, straining together, stressing together, and then they see the work that their teammates are putting in, we're apt to get a better response and better environment even on the football field because they know the work that's been put in. They know how their teammates have strained and put in effort. So for me, I like doing it in a group. And then within that, bringing the groups together and then obviously separating within the proper training section. So it's not like I'm going to have a skill position player lifting or following the same protocols as some of our big guys that are 350 pounds. If you're a 180-pound defensive back, you're going to be in the defensive back program with their group. But within that, I do like to intermingle so those guys can kind of cross-contaminate and see each other. So how the flow will work is everyone will start with a general prep, and then we'll have everyone tick off the tissue preparation that we need to see, the activation elements that we want to see based on whatever that day's training stimulus is. So if it's a heavy lower body day, we're obviously going to trigger into tissue manipulation for the lower body. We're probably going to release the psoas if it's a heavy backloading day to make sure we're in an anatomically sound state through the hips. We're going to make sure that we're touching all the tissue around the hip musculature, and then we're going to start to activate. We're going to build in activation through the glutes specifically. We're going to activate everything from the lower body side on up, and then we're going to go through a couple different exercises that might be stimulated towards if we're going to jump on the force plate that day or whatever our tracking measurement could be. And then as we break, we bring them in, we explain whatever the expectations are for that day's training. We let the groups go, and then each specific coach will be assigned a group for that day, so then the players go with that coach. So if you're in Group A, you're a linebacker, you're going to go with your coach for that day who has all the linebackers, and then they'll flow with them throughout that workout. And then within that, once again, we have the cross-contamination. They're going to come in, they'll be close by their other teammates that might play different positions, but then they can compete with them if there's a similar exercise for that day, and we can start to build that cultural aspect like I mentioned.
Yeah, wow. Sounds like you've set the bar pretty high for a lot of strength coaches out there.
Yeah. This is a fantastic. It's just a really comprehensive application of velocity based training. So it's pretty cool to hear.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so with that, with force velocity profiles and load velocity profiles, when do you sort of tend to get those capture all that sort of data and understand what players need to work on?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that's ongoing. I mean, one of the cool things that we've tried to utilize this from a force velocity side to is we assign body weights. So we can find players based on specific body weights and weight ranges. And one of the things, I guess, if you look at the quote unquote old school way of just saying you're this position, you should weigh X, and you just throw a standardized number at it. One of the things that we're really trying to dive into and allow this data to quantify for us is, okay, when this athlete is at X body weight, their power potential is this. When we see that shift in body weight down, up, whatever, we actually see a power shift. Now, okay, if we can get an athlete in an ideal state for a power production standpoint, that's critically more important at certain positions than it is at other positions. There's other positions where efficiency, speed, like a wide receiver, carries a little bit more weight. So what's that fine line where we start to see along the force velocity curve what's enough power, what's adequate, and what's within range? And then when do we start seeing a dip that might take you out of that standard range that we want you? Can you still weigh 202 pounds, but also produce the amount of force that we need you to within your position where we feel that you're protecting yourself, but also at the maximum ability that you can produce at that body weight? And then if you get 2 pounds lighter, do we lose power? And we're not okay with that. Or if you get 5 pounds heavier, does it increase power, but we're losing efficiency? So now we've lost a little bit of an ability to exert that force that we've developed over time. So we're still trying to dive into that long-winded answer for your question. But as we go through that, that's one of the things that we feel like we're getting much closer to the bullseye. So leveraging this information, leveraging this data, and obviously we're looking at force plate information. We're looking at a lot of data measurements and variables here. But the closer we can get to that, I feel really confident that we're going to be able to set players up to be in a better position, not just weight-wise, but getting them in line with how we can maximize them within their body and their frames.
Yeah, great. So the next question we've got is it's really about auto-regulation, I guess, or what elements or ways you use auto-regulation. The question is really, how do you keep players fit or on form and mitigate injury risk across the season, but couched in terms of velocity-based training?
Yeah, it's a great question. The one thing that I do feel velocity-based training allows you to do, and it's an unbelievable tool, is when you do deload or reload, whatever you want to term it, this really does allow you to quantify that. So, you can strain, you can stress the system from an adaptation standpoint. We work with elite level players who can super compensate. I mean, they're great at what they do because they're physical freaks, for lack of a better term. So within that, if I'm stressing them for a month-long block and I really say, okay, I know that this is going to be a stressful 3 weeks leading into this fourth week that I have planned as a deload. What is a deload if the players were maybe let a little bit of a leash to go too hard? Well, now we have exercises and we have tools and we can track through GymAware and velocity-based training and other methods where we say, okay, here's the speed where I need you at and here's the exact load. If we're going above that, I'm going to be able to track it. So based on your velocity, based on maybe the force plate from that week and the 3 weeks prior, based on all these metrics and all these variables, how can we get you back to the stage where we absolutely need you to be? And what's too much and what's too little? That's the tug of war that we constantly play, I think, as performance coaches, is finding that happy medium. We got to find the magical middle ground of what's enough, what's too much. I want to do as much as humanly possible, get as close as possible to doing too much, not go over that line, but tiptoe it, and then come back down, let the athletes super compensate, let them adapt, and then do it again for another cycle. So through the NFL season, it's no different. If you're going through a month-long cycle, I think you build up to as much as you can possibly do. We have to continue to peak each week at that point because we play one match a week and one game a week, and then we have to have the ability to bring them back down. So it allows me and gives me, once again, more confidence that when I am programming and when we're coming up with these plans, that we're really following suit. Because if we're not, the data is going to tell us that, and then the athletes subjectively should match that.
I just want to jump in with it's still on topic, but like I just said, this is a really comprehensive application of velocity-based training. How did you achieve this? Like, your understanding is concise but broad. Like, what did you do to get to this point? Because where's your learning? Where are you picking this up from? Is it time? So how does a coach get to this level?
Well, I'm not there. I appreciate the words and that's flattering and everything else, but I still have to get better. I'm continuously learning. And that's the thing that I love about this is we can learn something new every day, specifically with all the available technology that we have, particularly in velocity-based training or some of the applications we've gotten from force plates over recent years. It's unbelievable the amount of knowledge we can gain just from a few simple lifts or exercises. From that, the one thing that I've learned, and it's been through time, really, it's been through time and experience and really making errors, just like we all do. The mistakes that I've made are nothing but learning opportunities. And if you always carry that attitude, I don't fail, I either win or I'm gaining a learning opportunity. So I look at things that way. Have I made mistakes? Yeah, 100%. And you got to be able to own them and say, guys, I should not have programmed for that. I made that error. That's 100% on me. Here's how I'm going to learn from it. And here's how I'm going to be better for you going forward. So it's been time, but it's been error. And then throughout that, it's allowed me, I think, to have this microscopic and this telescopic view to where I can zoom in and zoom out. When you're thinking about planning for a global NFL team or a professional football team, there's a lot of variables that go into that, a lot. And then when you actually zoom out, that can become overwhelming if you allow it to. So you have to have the ability from that global view to be able to zoom back in and isolate into the things that you need to control. So global view is, I want to win the Super Bowl. Great. Okay, let's zoom back in microscopic. Right now, we're just launching a virtual offseason for the first time in the history of the NFL. How do we strategically plan? How do we base everything on exercises available? Because equipment availability is a completely different, unique process right now. Guys are scattered all over the world with very different aspects of what they have available to train with. So now zoom in. How do we isolate these guys that can only do body weight exercises right now? Okay, bam, here's this one. Zoom out. These guys have a squat rack. Awesome. Here, this allows us to do that. So zooming out, zooming back in, and constantly doing that. I find myself doing that, I don't know how many times a day, but constantly saying, this is the global view. Okay, now how do we isolate that in? Let's microscope view in, let's zoom, and let's say this, and this are the things that are going to get us here. And then being able to do that consistently. That's the thing where I find has helped me the most, being in this role and being able to control certain things that overall will have a dramatic impact on the team. But also, if you skip those fine, minute details and you just expect the global to take care of itself, you're missing a big picture and you're going to skip the process that will ultimately lead you there.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a really good approach. Look, we don't want to keep you too long, Ted, because we know you have to get back to wife and kids. But yeah, just want to really thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts and opinions with us. All the best for the virtual season, anyway.
Awesome.
Will, do you have anything?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah, thanks, man. We appreciate your time and all the best with it.
Awesome. Jay, Will, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for your guys' time. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
See you guys.